It was supposed to be just another Thursday evening in America. Millions of people were settling in their living rooms, some still in their work clothes, others already changed into comfortable sweatpants. They reached for their remote controls, clicking to their favorite news channel just in time for Political Roundtable at 8 p.m. sharp. The show had been a staple of political discussion for years, known for bringing together people from opposite sides of the political fence. Tonight was different, though. The production team had been buzzing with nervous energy all day. Lisa, the head producer, kept checking her watch and glancing at the two separate green rooms where the guests were waiting. "This might be either brilliant or a complete disaster," she whispered to her assistant. The studio lights dimmed momentarily before blazing to full brightness. The familiar theme music played as the camera panned across the sleek set with its polished wooden table and backdrop of the Washington skyline. Tom Richards, the silver-haired host known for his calm demeanor and 20 years of experience, straightened his tie and smiled at the camera. "Good evening, America. Tonight on Political Roundtable, we have what might be our most interesting pairing yet." His voice carried the perfect mix of authority and intrigue that had made him a trusted figure in millions of homes. The first guest walked onto the set. Karoline Leavitt moved with confidence that seemed beyond her years. At just 25, she had already made a name for herself as one of the Republican Party's most effective communicators. With her perfectly pressed blazer and prepared notes, she looked ready for battle. She shook Tom's hand firmly and took her seat, arranging her water glass and notepad with precision. And joining us from the world of entertainment, but certainly no stranger to political discourse, Tom continued, "Please welcome acclaimed actor and director Robert De Niro." The audience applauded as De Niro walked in, his famous face instantly recognizable to everyone watching. He moved with the casual confidence of someone who had spent decades in the public eye. Unlike Leavitt's careful preparation, De Niro carried nothing but himself to the table. He offered a quick nod to Tom and a brief, somewhat reluctant handshake to Leavitt before sitting down. The difference between them was striking. Leavitt, young and meticulously prepared, represented the new guard of her party. De Niro, with his Hollywood gravitas and decades of outspoken political comments, brought star power but perhaps not the same level of policy expertise. In the control room, Lisa whispered into her headset, "Camera 3, get that shot of them not making eye contact." The tension was exactly what would keep viewers from changing the channel. Tom smiled, looking between his guests. "Tonight, we'll be discussing the impact of recent policy changes on everyday Americans. We've promised our viewers a civil conversation across the political divide." He emphasized the word civil just enough that viewers at home picked up on the implied question, would it actually remain civil? Leavitt sat up straighter, her posture perfect, a slight smile playing at the corner of her mouth. De Niro leaned back in his chair, one hand resting on the table, his expression unreadable. Off-camera, the floor director counted down with his fingers. 3, 2, 1. "Ms. Leavitt, let's begin with you," Tom said. "Your response to the administration's latest economic proposal." The cameras zoomed in as Leavitt took a breath and began speaking, her words measured and practiced. De Niro's eyes narrowed slightly. And in living rooms across America, millions leaned forward just a little, sensing that something unexpected was about to unfold on their screens. Leavitt finished her opening statement with a practiced smile. "The numbers don't lie," she said, tapping her finger on the printout in front of her. 6 months of rising costs for everyday Americans, while Washington celebrates what they call success. Tom nodded and turned to his other guest. "Mr. De Niro, your thoughts on Ms. Leavitt's assessment?" De Niro shifted in his chair and leaned forward. "Look, I'm not a politician," he began, his distinctive voice carrying the weight of someone used to being listened to. "But I know what I see happening in this country. The policies we're talking about are helping people, real people." The exchange started politely enough. Back and forth they went, like boxers in the first round, testing each other's defenses. The studio lights felt a bit warmer as the conversation continued. A production assistant quietly slipped Tom a note with viewing numbers. People were tuning in, sensing something brewing between these unlikely opponents. "With respect, Mr. De Niro," Leavitt said, her voice still pleasant but with an edge beginning to form, "feelings aren't facts. Let's look at the actual data." She flipped to another page in her binder. Manufacturing jobs in the Midwest down 4% since January. Small business closures up nearly 12%. De Niro frowned. He hadn't expected such specific numbers. That's cherry-picking statistics, he countered, the famous intensity from his films beginning to show in his eyes. The bigger picture shows progress. Tom, sensing the rising tension, tried to steer towards safer ground. Let's discuss the infrastructure bill that passed last month. But neither guest was interested in changing course now. Leavitt smiled again, this time with a hint of something almost predatory. Actually, I'd like to address Mr. De Niro's claim about cherry-picking. She pulled out a graph that the camera quickly zoomed in on. These aren't isolated numbers. This is a pattern affecting working families in all 50 states. The control room buzzed with excitement. Stay on her face, Lisa directed through the headsets. Then cut to his reaction. De Niro rubbed his hand across his jaw, a gesture millions had seen in his films when his characters were backed into a corner. He wasn't used to being challenged this way, not with such specific information he couldn't easily counter. The problem, Leavitt continued, her voice never rising but somehow filling the studio, is that policies created in Washington boardrooms and celebrated at Hollywood fundraisers don't always translate to help for the family trying to afford groceries in Ohio or the small business owner in Nevada. The actor's face tightened. He glanced at Tom, perhaps hoping for some redirection, but the host simply nodded for him to respond. That's a simplification, De Niro said, his legendary voice now carrying a hint of defensiveness. These issues are complex. Complex for whom? Leavitt asked, leaning forward. They seem pretty straightforward to the people living with the consequences. In living rooms across America, viewers were now fully engaged. Phone screens were forgotten, conversations paused. Something was happening here beyond the usual political talk show banter. You're making this political, De Niro accused, color rising in his face. Leavitt looked genuinely surprised for the first time. Mr. De Niro, this is a political discussion show. That's why we're both here. A few audience members couldn't help but laugh, quickly silenced by the floor director's raised hand. De Niro's eyes narrowed. The camera caught the slight tremor in his hand as he reached for his water glass. This wasn't how these appearances usually went for him. Usually he made his points, received appreciative nods, and the conversation moved on. But Leavitt kept pushing, kept challenging, her youth and energy contrasting with his growing discomfort. Tom checked his watch. They were only 7 minutes into a 20-minute segment. The real fireworks hadn't even started yet. Tom looked at his notes, sensing it was time to move to a new topic. Let's discuss the impact of recent tax proposals on different income brackets. De Niro nodded, visibly relieved at the chance to reset the conversation. But Leavitt wasn't finished with the previous point. Before we move on, she said, her voice carrying a politeness that somehow made what followed even more cutting, I'd like to address something Mr. De Niro mentioned about rural communities. De Niro frowned. He couldn't remember specifically mentioning rural communities. You suggested that the economic concerns were overblown, Leavitt continued. I wonder if you've had the chance to visit places like Grayson County recently, or Westland, places where the factories have closed and the downtown shops are empty. The camera caught De Niro's expression, a mixture of confusion and growing irritation. He straightened in his chair. I travel across America more than you might think, he said, his famous voice now carrying an edge. For film premieres and fundraisers, certainly, Leavitt said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. But with all due respect, Mr. De Niro, living in a Manhattan penthouse, doesn't give you perspective on how these policies affect everyday Americans who can't afford to donate $10,000 a plate to political campaigns. The studio went completely silent. Even Tom seemed unsure how to redirect this unexpected personal turn. In the control room, Lisa was frantically signaling to get ready for any outcome. This was ratings gold, but could also spiral out of control quickly. De Niro's jaw tightened. The camera caught the subtle change in his posture, the same tension viewers had seen in his most intense film roles. When he spoke, his words came out measured but with unmistakable anger beneath them. That's a cheap shot. You don't know anything about my life or my understanding of this country. Leavitt remained perfectly composed. I know what you've said publicly, and I know the policies you've supported. And I know the numbers showing how those policies have failed the very people they claim to help. She turned slightly to face the camera directly. While celebrities lecture from coastal mansions, families in places like Butler County can't afford both groceries and medication. That's not a talking point. That's reality. De Niro opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. He glanced at Tom, perhaps hoping for some intervention, but the host was allowing the moment to play out. In homes across America, no one was checking their phones now. Children were being shushed so parents could hear. This wasn't the typical polite disagreement that played out on political shows. This was something raw and real. Let me be clear, Leavitt continued, her voice still never rising above a conversational tone, which somehow made her words land even harder. I don't question your passion or your right to speak on these issues. But when you dismiss the genuine economic hardship facing millions as overblown concerns, that shows a disconnect from reality. De Niro leaned forward now, one finger pointing. Now wait just a minute. But Leavitt wasn't finished. The last 3 factories in Millwood closed last year. 800 jobs gone. The average household income dropped $18,000. The food bank line stretches 3 blocks every Tuesday. These aren't statistics I memorized for TV. These are real places with real people who are really suffering while being told the economy is booming. De Niro's face had turned a shade redder. The camera caught a supple tremor in his hand as he reached again for his water glass. You've played some incredible characters over the years, Mr. De Niro, Leavitt said, her tone softer now, but somehow even more devastating. But perhaps you've spent too long in a world where problems get solved in 2 hours with a script and a soundtrack. In the control room, Lisa whispered to her assistant, "Get ready, he's about to blow." For a moment, there was complete silence in the studio. Tom shifted in his chair, notes forgotten, sensing that whatever happened next would be beyond his control. The camera operators exchanged glances. This wasn't in the script. "You know nothing about me," De Niro finally said, his voice dangerously quiet. The famous actor leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. "Nothing." "I know what you've said publicly," Leavitt replied calmly. "I know the policies you champion, and You sit there with your talking points and your rehearsed zingers," De Niro cut in, his voice rising. "You think this is all a game, don't you? Some kind of performance?" Leavitt raised her eyebrows slightly. "I think it's a serious discussion about policies affecting real people, which is why I came prepared with facts rather than feelings." That was the breaking point. De Niro's legendary composure, the calm before the storm that moviegoers had witnessed in dozens of films, shattered completely. His hand came down hard on the table, sending his water glass jumping and nearly toppling over. "Facts," he said, his voice now loud enough that sound technicians scrambled to adjust levels. "You want facts. The fact is you people have been selling lies to hard-working Americans for years." The vein in his forehead became visible under the studio lights. Tom leaned forward. "Mr. De Niro, if we could just—" "No, no," De Niro continued, gesturing dismissively at the host without taking his eyes off Leavitt. "I've sat here and listened to this rehearsed performance. Enough." In the control room, Lisa was frantically signaling to her team, "Stay on him. Get his reaction. Don't cut away." The ratings meter was climbing by the second as viewers across America texted friends, "Are you seeing this?" Leavitt remained perfectly still, her expression neutral, but with just the hint of a smile at the corner of her mouth. It was the look of someone who had set a trap and watched it spring shut exactly as planned. "You sit in your bubble," De Niro continued, his famous hands now gesturing wildly, "with your perfectly memorized statistics, pretending you know what real Americans want." "I don't need to pretend," Leavitt replied, her voice still calm. "I listened to them." "Did you?" De Niro half rose from his chair. "I've been listening to Americans for longer than you've been alive." His voice had reached a volume that echoed through the studio. A makeup artist backstage whispered to a production assistant, "I've never seen him like this, not even on set." Tom tried again to regain control. "Let's take a moment, Toe. You think you can lecture me?" De Niro continued, ignoring Tom completely. "Robert De Niro? About understanding America?" He jabbed a finger toward Leavitt. Who exactly do you think you are? The floor director was now signaling frantically for Tom to go to commercial break, but the host hesitated. This moment was television history unfolding live. Leavitt simply straightened her papers and looked directly at De Niro. I'm someone who came prepared to discuss policy rather than rely on my celebrity status, Mr. De Niro, and your reaction suggests I've touched a nerve with the truth. De Niro's face was now scarlet. The truth. The truth. His fist came down on the table again, harder this time. His water glass tipped over, creating a spreading puddle that nobody moved to clean up. You wouldn't recognize the truth if it. We need to take a short break, Tom finally interrupted, his professional facade cracking just slightly as he looked directly into the camera. We'll be right back with more from Political Roundtable. As the on-air light flicked off, De Niro continued his tirade, unaware or uncaring that millions of home viewers could no longer hear him. But studio audience members were already pulling out their phones, fingers flying across screens as they shared what they were witnessing. Don't cut the studio feed, Lisa ordered from the control room. Keep recording everything. This is going straight to the website the second we're back from commercial. The red on-air light blinked back on. Tom forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Welcome back to Political Roundtable. We're continuing our discussion with Karoline Leavitt and Robert De Niro. But something had changed during the commercial break. De Niro's tie was slightly loosened, and a production assistant had mopped up the spilled water. The actor sat stiffly, jaw clenched, while Leavitt appeared completely unruffled, as if the previous explosion had never happened. Let's move to a different topic, Tom suggested, his voice carrying a forced cheerfulness. But outside the studio, the real story was already unfolding. The network's social media team had posted a 30-second clip of De Niro's outburst before the show even returned from commercial. Within minutes, those 30 seconds were racing across the internet. In a college dorm room in Michigan, a young man paused his video game. "Guys, you have to see this," he called to his roommates, turning his laptop screen to show them the clip. De Niro just completely lost it on live TV. At a dinner party in Seattle, phones began buzzing simultaneously. "Did you see what just happened?" a woman asked, showing the clip to the table. Conversation about the food was instantly forgotten. In the CNN newsroom, a producer rushed to the chief editor's desk. "We need to cut into programming. De Niro just had a meltdown on Political Roundtable. It's already everywhere." Back in the studio, the final segment limped along. De Niro gave short, clipped answers, his legendary speaking voice now flattened by barely contained anger. Leavitt maintained her composed demeanor, which seemed to irritate him even more. When Tom finally said, "That's all the time we have tonight," the relief on his face was obvious. "Thank you both for joining us." As soon as the cameras stopped rolling, De Niro yanked off his microphone and stormed off the set without a word to anyone. A stunned makeup artist stepped back against the wall as he brushed past. The actor's publicist, who had been watching in horror from the sidelines, hurried after him, already dialing on her phone. Lisa burst onto the set from the control room. "That was incredible," she exclaimed, her eyes wide with excitement. "Tom, great job keeping it together. Karoline, can you stay for some additional social media spots? This is going to be our biggest night ever." Leavitt nodded calmly as she gathered her notes. "Happy to help," she said, her voice betraying no emotion about what had just happened. In De Niro's waiting car, the actor sat in stony silence as his publicist spoke rapidly into her phone. "We need to get ahead of this," she was saying. "It's already trending nationwide. Yes, all the hashtags are about him losing his cool." The actor stared out the window as New York traffic crawled past. In his long career, he had played countless tough guys, gangsters, and intimidating characters. But he had always been in control. Tonight was different. Tonight the script had gotten away from him. Meanwhile, at network headquarters, executives gathered around a screen watching the ratings pour in. The numbers were climbing higher by the minute as people who had heard about the confrontation tuned in to the West Coast broadcast or sought out clips online. "This is gold," the network president said, unable to hide his smile. Absolute ratings gold. The hashtags #De Niro Meltdown and #Leavitt Destroyed were climbing to the top trends nationwide. Video clips, some edited to just the most explosive moments, Others extended to show more context, spread across every platform. Comment sections filled with thousands of opinions, arguing over who had won the exchange. A late-night comedy show writer's room in Los Angeles erupted with activity as the head writer burst in. "Change of plans for tonight's monologue," he announced. "You've all seen the De Niro clip, right?" The room erupted in chatter as they began frantically rewriting the opening of that night's show. And on her way to her next appointment, sitting in the back of her own car, Leavitt finally allowed herself a small, satisfied smile as she watched the notifications flood her phone. Her press secretary texted, "5 major networks want you tomorrow morning. Fox News is calling every 30 seconds. This is it." By midnight, the confrontation between Leavitt and De Niro had transformed from a television moment into a cultural event. In bedrooms and living rooms across America, people who had never watched Political Roundtable were now hunched over phones and laptops, replaying the clip for the 5th or 6th time. "Play the part where he slams the table again," a teenager told his dad as they sat together in their kitchen, both neglecting their late-night snacks to watch the drama unfold on a tablet propped against the fruit bowl. In Los Angeles, Jimmy Kimmel tore up his planned monologue just 30 minutes before showtime. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said to his live audience as cameras rolled, "I don't know if you've been on the internet in the last 3 hours, but Robert De Niro just gave us the easiest show prep we've ever had." The audience erupted in knowing laughter. On the other side of the country, De Niro's publicist paced the floor of her Manhattan apartment, phone pressed to her ear. "No, he absolutely will not be giving any interviews tomorrow," she insisted to the 5th network producer who had called. "No comment means no comment." She ended the call and immediately her phone lit up with another request. In a downtown bar in Chicago, the bartender switched one of the TVs from a baseball game to a news channel where they were already dissecting the exchange. "I never thought I'd see De Niro lose his cool like that," he said to a customer. The guy who played Travis Bickle and Jake LaMotta just got rattled by a press secretary. The customer nodded. "That's the thing about real life, no second takes." Online, creativity flourished as the internet did what it does best. Someone set De Niro's table slam to dramatic music from The Godfather. Another creator paired it with the beat drop from a popular dance track. A college student with video editing skills spliced De Niro's outburst with scenes from his famous films, making it seem like his characters were reacting to Leavitt's comments. "This is already at 8 million views." A content creator told his roommate as he put the finishing touches on his own remix version. "People can't get enough of it." In a late-night comedy writer's room, exhausted writers gulped coffee as they reworked their opening sketch. "What if we have the host dress as De Niro, but every time he tries to make a point, someone playing Leavitt just calmly destroys him with facts until he explodes?" The head writer nodded enthusiastically. "And then his wig flies off. Perfect." Meanwhile, on cable news, the talking heads were having a field day. "What we witnessed tonight was the embodiment of the coastal elite's disconnection from everyday Americans," said a conservative commentator, barely containing his glee. De Niro expected his Hollywood status to protect him from having to actually defend his views. On another channel, the spin was different. And through it all, Leavitt's phone continued to light up with notifications, opportunities, and interview requests. Her following on social media platforms had quadrupled overnight. She had become, in the strange alchemy of modern media, that most valuable of commodities. A moment personified. 1 week after the confrontation, the buzz showed no signs of slowing down. What industry insiders had expected to be a 2-day story had instead become something more enduring. Leavitt stepped out of a black SUV onto the sidewalk outside a major network's headquarters. A small crowd of people waiting nearby immediately held up phones to capture her arrival. She gave a small wave, not too eager, not too dismissive, exactly the kind of wave her new media coach had practiced with her. "That's her," a young woman told her friend. "The one who made Robert De Niro lose it." Inside, a production assistant greeted her. "They're ready for you in the main studio. It's your 5th interview this week, right?" Leavitt nodded with a polite smile. 6th, actually. Across town, in a wood-paneled office with views of Central Park, De Niro sat across from his agent and publicist. Neither looked happy. "The director is willing to postpone shooting for 2 weeks," the agent said, sliding a folder across the desk. That gives us time to let this die down a bit. Die down? De Niro asked, his voice quieter than it had been on television that night. It's been a week. His publicist sighed. The problem is the remixes, the memes. They've taken on a life of their own. Every teenager in America can imitate your table slam now. She didn't mention that her own nephew had shown her his impression at a family dinner just 2 nights ago. We've drafted a statement, she continued, pulling out a printed page. Just a short acknowledgement that the discussion became heated, that you're passionate about these issues, and that you respect the importance of civil dialogue. De Niro didn't take the paper. So I should apologize for caring too much. His agent leaned forward. Bob, 3 late-night shows did parodies of you last night alone. The streaming numbers on your films have actually dropped 8% since this happened. People are viewing you differently. The publicist nodded. The right statement could help change the narrative. Meanwhile, in a university lecture hall, a professor of political communication pulled up the now famous clip. What we're seeing here, she told her students, is a masterclass in preparation versus reputation. Notice how Leavitt never raises her voice? That's deliberate. At the back of the room, a teaching assistant nodded. This clip would be shown in classes like this for years to come. In Washington, D.C., a congressman's chief of staff ended a call and turned to his boss. That was Leavitt's team. She's agreed to speak at the conference next month. The congressman looked up from his papers. Book the biggest room available. Everyone will want to see her. 2 weeks after the confrontation, Leavitt stood at a podium addressing a crowd triple the size of any she'd spoken to before. Cameras flashed as she delivered her carefully crafted message about bringing facts to emotional arguments and standing firm when challenged by power. The crowd ate it up. Young political hopefuls in the audience scribbled notes. This was the new template for success, calm under pressure, prepared with data, and ready for the viral moment. 1 month after the confrontation, a political consultant walked into a strategy meeting with a new client, a businessman considering a run for state office. The first thing we need to do, the consultant said, is prepare you for confrontation. After the Leavitt-De Niro moment, voters expect candidates to handle pressure without losing their cool. The businessman nodded. I watched that clip at least 10 times. Everyone did. 3 months after the confrontation, De Niro finally returned to the public eye with a carefully orchestrated interview with a friendly journalist. They sat in comfortable chairs in a softly lit setting. Looking back, the journalist asked gently, "What would you have done differently that night?" De Niro paused, his famous face thoughtful. "I would have listened more and reacted less," he said with the careful delivery of someone who had rehearsed this answer many times. When passion overrides patience, nobody wins. The clip of this more reflective De Niro got some attention, but nothing like the original confrontation. Some commented that he seemed more subdued than before, less the fiery personality they had grown accustomed to over decades. 6 months after the confrontation, a group of freshman political science students settled into their seats for the first day of modern political communication. Their professor walked in and, without introduction, played the now legendary clip of Leavitt and De Niro. This single exchange, the professor said as the clip ended, changed how we approach political discussion in America. Before we study anything else this semester, we need to understand what happened here, how preparation beat improvisation, how composure defeated emotion, and how, in just 7 minutes of television, the rules of public discourse were rewritten. In the back row, a student whispered to her friend, "My dad says he still can't look at De Niro the same way in movies." And in a quiet restaurant far from the spotlight, Karoline Leavitt signed the final page of a book contract. The title page read, "Composed, How to Stand Your Ground When Giants Fall."